Good afternoon and welcome. My name's Nick Morris and I'm the Dean of the Kane College of the Arts, and I'm really grateful to my colleagues at the museum for asking me to welcome you today. This is a wonderful event, and it's a real great confluence of circumstances that bring us together, led by the Executive Director of the museum, Katie Lee Coven, and Assistant Professor of Art History, Álvaro Ibarra. I know you're going to have a wonderful time with the panel discussion, the film, and of course the exhibition of Artepaño. Just a little word about how important it is to have the NEMA as an outlet for research, teaching, creative work, and of course the community engagement mission that the Kane College of the Arts and the Nora Eccles Harrison Museum of Art share. We find that things get amplified when we work together on projects, and this is no exception. It's wonderful to see my colleague, Dr. Ibarra, shine in this light, and I'm really grateful to the Executive Director, Katie, for opening her doors to this collaboration and showcasing his work as an academic and art historian. So please join me in both thanking and welcoming the Executive Director of the Nora Eccles Harrison Museum of Art, Katie Lee Coven, to the mic.
Thank you, Nick. Tonight's panel discussion was organized in conjunction with the exhibition that, if you haven't seen it already, following the panel, we'll have a reception and music next door at the museum, so I hope you'll join us. And so this panel came together so that we could really unpack a little bit more with you tonight with the exhibition, Artepaño, Chicano Handkerchief Prisoner Art, featuring 71 artworks by Latinx artists working in the context of the American penal system. The exhibit highlights an artistic tradition that emerged, it seems, at least 100 years ago, and within the penitentiaries across the American Southwest. A paño is a standard 15 by 15 inch cotton handkerchief transformed into a work of art by prisoners who self-identify as Chicano, Mexican-American, Latino, or Hispanic. Paño art begins with the white handkerchiefs available for purchase in a prison commissary. The exhibition came about when art historian and curator Dr. Álvaro Ibarra, assistant professor of art history, was curating another exhibition for us, actually, on Latinx works from the collection. And he discovered the 4 paños that we have in our collection. You don't find paños in many art museum collections, but our collecting focus has always been to reflect the fullest range of human and artistic experiences in the Western United States. And I want to thank and acknowledge George Wanless and the Catherine Kane Wanless Foundation, who acquired those 4 paños for us back in 2009. The majority of the work that Dr. Ibarra selected for the exhibition came from the private collection of Reno, Laplat-Torti, who has the largest collection of paño art in the world. The exhibition also includes works on loan from the National Hispanic Cultural Center in Albuquerque, New Mexico. So we want to thank both Reno and the Hispanic Cultural Center for loaning works to make this exhibit possible. The exhibition and a forthcoming book have been made possible by the generous support of the Terra Foundation for American Art. I want to thank them. This would not be possible without their support. The book has essays by Dr. Ben Alcon and Álvaro Ibarra, who are both on the panel this evening. And there's an insert in your program, so if you would like to pre-order the book and get a discount, you can do so. There's a QR code and information there. And I also want to thank my incredible staff who have been involved with this exhibition, with the book, the promotion of the exhibition, and the event. For those who are here, I know they won't like this, but if you could stand, quickly, and let's just give them a round of applause and thank them. I know some of them are outside or in the back, kind of making sure things go as they should. But I feel very fortunate to have such an incredible team. So we'll start this evening with the film screening and then move into the conversation. So I would like to introduce our filmmaker. A full bio is in your program. Evangeline Griego is an award-winning film director and producer. As a documentary filmmaker, her credits include Calavera Highway, The New Americans, and My Journey Home for PBS. She worked on music videos for songs from the album Straight Outta Compton by hip-hop pioneers NWA. Having come up of age in the 80s and 90s, I had to mention that because that just blew me away. But she's also worked on major production companies, with major production companies such as Netflix, MGM, and Walt Disney. She is a proud 12th generation New Mexican, and many of her film projects help return agency to marginalized and disenfranchised people. So please help me welcome Evangeline, who's going to introduce the film. And the film is 30 minutes long, and those who are live streaming, there is a link. There should be a link in the chat. It's on our NEMA YouTube page. You can watch the film there, so there's no lag, and then rejoin us in 30 minutes. The film is almost exactly 30 minutes. So with that, please help me welcome the film director, Evangeline Griego.
Good evening, everybody, and thank you so very much for coming tonight. And Álvaro, thank you so much for pulling my film out of the closet, as this film was made about 30 years ago. And so the exciting part is this film, having been being 30 years old, is still absolutely relevant and current as it was then. Aside from, you'll see, notice technical things. It was shot in actual film, parts of it are in video, and you'll be able to distinguish, hopefully, quite clearly. But really, just want to say thank you so very much to everybody, and to Katie, and everybody at Nora Eccles, everybody at the university who's made this possible and brought all of us together for this amazing event, and to shed light on this amazing art form. So thank you very much.
Along with our moderator, Dr. Felipe Valencia. He is an associate professor of Spanish here at Utah State. So please help me welcome our panel.
Hi, thank you all for coming, and thank you, Katie. I'm going to introduce each of the panelists again, and then I will formulate some questions, and at the end I think there is some time for questions from the audience. So, from me to Álvaro, it's of course, Evangeline Griego is an award-winning film director and producer. As a documentary filmmaker, Vange's credits include Calavera Highway, The New Americans, and My Journey Home for PBS. She has some recognition for Paño Arte, Images from Inside, Border Visions, Visiones Fronterizas, and the Spirit Award-nominated Sir, No Sir. Her career also includes work with major production companies that include Netflix, MGM, Morgan Creek, and Walt Disney, and films like Chevolution, Show of Force, Nightbreed, Naked Lunch, and Pocahontas. She worked in music videos for songs from the album Straight Outta Compton by hip-hop pioneers NWA. Whether collaborative or independent, Vange's filmmaking sensibilities lie in activism and advocacy. Her company, About Time Productions, is currently developing Nuestra Historia, Our Story, a feature documentary about the history of New Mexico as told through the matriarchal perspective. Many of her film projects help return agency to marginalized and disenfranchised people. Evangeline Griego is a Sundance Producers Institute alumnus, an international filmmaker, and a proud 12th generation New Mexican. Ben Valdez Olguín is the Robert and Lisa Erickson Presidential Chair in English and Director of the Global Latinidades Center at the University of California, Santa Barbara, which is funded by over $2.4 million in grants. He originally is from a barrio called Magnolia in southeast Houston, Texas. He received a BA from the University of Houston, where his grandfather worked as a janitor, and MA and PhD from Stanford. Olguín is a Ford postdoctoral fellow and National Endowment for the Humanities Faculty Research Fellow. He previously served on English department faculties at Cornell University and the University of Texas at San Antonio, with visiting appointments in the Center for Mexican American Studies at the University of Texas at Austin. Olguín is the author of research monographs La Pinta, Chicano Prisoner Literature, Culture, and Politics, University of Texas Press, 2010, and Violentologies, Violence, Identity, and Ideology in Latino Literature, Oxford University Press, 2021. He's also co-editor of multiple anthologies, including Latina, Latinos, and World War II, Mobility, Agency, and Ideology, University of Texas Press, 2014, Altermundos, Latino Speculative Literature, Film, and Popular Culture of University of Washington Press, 2017, and in the long run, Luis J. Rodriguez's Life and Literary Legacy, Edinburgh University Press, forthcoming. As a creative writer, he has published 2 collections of poetry, Red Leather Gloves, with Hansen in 2014, about his experiences as an amateur boxer, and At the Risk of Seeming Ridiculous, Poems from Cuba Libre, Aztlán Libre, 2014, based on his membership in the Venceremos Brigade, which travels to Cuba annually to engage in people-to-people diplomacy, as well as educational and other exchanges. He currently is working on multiple scholarly, literary, and political projects, including a poetry collection, Pericardial Tamponade, or This Is How You Die, based on his experiences as a volunteer paramedic. His current research projects include a creative critical trilogy of travel writing and a scholarly monograph, Raza, Philosophical Legacies, Latinx Discourse, Global Conjunctures, and Epistemic Shifts. Reno Laplat-Torti, born in Marseille, France in 1984, is a silkscreen printer, graphic designer, comic strip author, documentary filmmaker, and collector. After training in graphic design, he attended the École des Beaux-Arts in Nîmes, where he founded the independent publishing house Nunu. At the same time, 15 years ago, he discovered the art of paños while surfing the internet in search of small objects made in closed environments. Struck by the power of the subject and the form, he contacted the families of American prisoners, then the prisoners by snail mail, and today he has a collection of over 800 handkerchiefs exhibited in numerous galleries and museums. After founding his own gallery in the south of France, he is now curator of a museum with moving walls. And last but not least, Álvaro Ibarra received his PhD in art history from the University of Texas at Austin. His curatorial projects and critical writing concern Mexican modernism and Latinx art. His scholarly writing and archaeological projects engage marginalia in ancient Rome. He also publishes on classical tradition, reception, and film and video games. He's an assistant professor of art history here at Utah State University and the curator of the exhibit. So the first question I have has to do with how paños challenge sort of the normative languages that we use to speak about art. When thinking and creating with paños in your own work, what languages have you used? What languages did you have to create or craft anew? In your case, Vanji, what cinematic languages did you choose in making your movie? Why? Ben, what academic and critical languages and poetical languages as a creative writer? Reno, what curatorial languages? And Álvaro, what art historical language, what curatorial languages?
Well, I think if I was making the film today, I'd have a much more intellectual perspective of what we're talking about. But having been my very first film, making my very first film with Paño Arte, and approaching the film really from an absolute personal passion of wanting to tell stories about my culture, my community, and having the tools to do that, and then meeting Rudy and becoming introduced to the art. My whole purpose in making the film was to, it was like a gift to our community to tell our story. And I felt as a Chicana that I was most able and capable of doing that, so often our stories are appropriated and told by others outside our culture. And so it was an opportunity for me to be able to tell this story and to show this art in a way that would be fully respected and understood. And so when talking about a language, I wanted to, everything that was foremost in my mind was always respect. And I wasn't putting these men and women on show. I was expressing, helping them, providing them with a tool to express themselves, and as much of themselves as they wanted to. We were having a conversation last night, and I mentioned that I had never asked any of them what they did to be in prison. That was not my concern. My concern was this art and to respect them as artists. So as far as a cinematic language that I was using, one of the very first choices I made was that I wanted to shoot all of the art in film, an actual 35 millimeter film, because to me that was going to be able to preserve it for a lifetime, and it was going to be able to show it in the most beautiful possible way. Video was available and it was cheap and all of that, but and I fought long and hard to be able to do it on film, and finding the right people to do that. So that was one of the very first sort of creative choices. And as a real novice filmmaker, you know, I didn't have a lot of the language. And I didn't study film. I didn't go to film school. I studied journalism and broadcast journalism, so I didn't come from a film school background. So I didn't have a lot of the language that I would now today be able to say, oh, I do this because of that. But if I want to be real honest, I did it because of what felt good and right to me. So using film, I wanted very much sort of a verite feeling. I think if you see the film, there's lots of areas of the film where I'm kind of like taking you in. You know, even the way we chose to shoot the paños, it was always like going in and like wanting to take the people on the journey, wanting to take the people into the prison, not for an effect, but more so of an impression and an understanding and an artistic view. Because I view these people, I say people because of men and women, but I view the men and the women as artists, and that's what I came into it. And then there were these artists who were reflecting their culture, so then there was a tremendous respect for the culture. So that's also why I chose the music that I chose. And all of the musicians, you know, are of the culture, and most from New Mexico. And also, so it was a lot about the style of filming. It was about making sure that it was on film, the editing and the cutting of in between the paños. You know, one of my very first favorite shots of the whole film is when the guy is in the grass, you know, boxing with his son, and then you cut to the paño. Because what I wanted to express, I wanted people to understand, were that these paños weren't just something that they were mass producing. These weren't just something they were doing to sell. These were reflections of their lives and their experiences. And that juxtaposition of, you know, real life with the paño to show that, and then to show how they really reflected their own culture, and the music even supported that. So I would say some of those are some of the things that I know consciously at that time, that's what I was trying to project into the film. I could speak now, 30 years later, looking at the film and knowing what I know now, and say, oh, I was, you know, thinking this and the other, but I'm not gonna go there.
Two words come to mind as I'm thinking about the academic resonance of this brilliant work that's been done by you, the filmmaker, but also by the artist. And the first word is vernacular, and the second is organic. And I think these two terms are important for us because, and I'll explain what I mean, but they're important for us because they resonate beyond this community. Okay? They're going to resonate with all of us. So let me start with vernacular. Vernacular is a term that comes from vernaculus. It means slave born in the master's house. It's basically the underclass, right? And what we have here is a form of vernacular or underclass art, vernacular aesthetics, vernacular epistemology or philosophy, and vernacular subjectivities, and I want to break these down because they're important, because they're going to resonate, say, from people who are from Appalachia, for instance, or from rural parts of Utah or other places. We all have analogs of vernacular intellectuals and vernacular artists in our communities. You might have a great-grandfather or an aunt who has brought some old-time songs, or they might have old-time sayings. That's vernacular philosophy. And what we saw in this film is a lot of the vernacular philosophy, the underclass thinking about power. You saw someone meditating on the age-old dilemma of existence. What is it? What happens to this body when it dies? Are people going to remember me? The question of immortality. It led human cultures to develop all kinds of philosophies and belief systems and what have you. Well, he's meditating on the biggest thing of all, existence. And there's another guy in there who's featured talking about institutions, and that's also some of the lyrics as well. Institutional crime was one of the lyrics, and one of the guys was talking about what we now call the school-to-prison pipeline. He was giving us political discourse without, beating us on the head over it. I wanted to be here. My dad was here. I'm here now. My paintings or my drawings will leave, I don't know about the person, is what he is. Again, without breaking down a Marxist theory of power, he's giving us an underclass understanding of material realities within which some people really don't have a shot. It's not a fair world. And he was giving that, and then other artists break it down even further. You had Rudy, what's his last name? Badilla, with a UFW paño. So it starts to get into cultural nationalist discourse. And then you have yet more allusions to Mesoamerica. And that is also very deep because, as we know, that animates what we call the Chicano movement or Chicano movement. And if you permit me this aside, it's articulated through this concept of Aztlán, right? The mythic homeland of the Nahua peoples. That's in Utah, if you don't already know that, right? The caves from which the Nahua people, who became known mostly through the Aztecs, there's a lot of Nahua people, but the Aztecs were the most famous, came from here. Or actually, it's apparently some of the caves in Salt Lake. But it resonates in an important way. But beyond that, they are participating in a cultural nationalist discourse as well. And I have some paños from Chicano political prisoners. One, Álvaro Hernández Luna, went to prison for burning up some police cars and stuff, and then became somewhat like a Malcolm X type figure, basically. And he's still in prison now. And he communicates his political philosophy through his paños, which are more overtly theorizing power from below. So the vernacular is a really important term, and it's something that we see a case of it here, and it's going to relate to our own family members. You might have an aunt or a brother or what have you who is a machinist. My father was a plater. And they understand value in a different way. They have to go to work with dangerous machines. They might lose a finger or what have you. And they're going to develop a philosophy based on their material realities. So again, we have artists here who are meditating from below. So that's one of the terms that's really important. The last term, organic, I'll probably come back to that in a bit. But I want to just foreground the idea of organic intellectuals, and we'll come back. We'll come back to that in a bit. Thank you.
Good evening. As you will notice, my profile is totally different than the other friends on the stage, the other guests. I'm French, and when I fall into the Paño Arte, I wasn't knowing nothing about the Chicana cultura. I came in that culture because of the drawings, and so it's my profile is totally different than the others, and in my opinion, the art become a way of taking care on these people, or to fight for their rights, actually, because making exhibitions is, of course, you cannot speak only about the drawings, but you have to speak about the profile of those people and their story, and to speak about this is already fighting for them and to show. So in my way of doing things is to make the maximum exhibitions. Tonight we are in a big institution, but 10 days before I was doing an exhibition in a tattoo shop in New York, and the audience was totally different, but the way the people are looking to the exhibition are always very positive, and from all the exchanges I have had with the inmates, each time I'm speaking about exhibition that we are going to Japan, I mean we, because they're not going to Japan, I do, but the exhibition and their work is going to Japan with me, and each time they're super proud because the return we have about the exhibition are super positive, and they always told me that that's the first time we are having a positive point of view from the outside, and especially from people that don't know us. So art, and it's said in the movie, I don't remember exactly the sentence, but art is a way to improve yourself. Thank you.
I think my approach is one of manufacturing distance, which sounds a little funny because I grew up with this stuff. I remember I can't remember, 9, 10 years old, and a cousin of mine, you know, she showed me one of these things that her boyfriend, you know, had sent her from prison. You know, he wasn't a bad guy, he wasn't a good guy either, but you know, I think, oh, is that better? Okay, I think he got, you know, crossing with a couple of kilos or something like that, but whatever it was, right? So he was behind bars, he was a tattoo artist, and then ended up making paños. So it was this very sort of very personal connection to these things. And I'd seen them over the years, you know, at different people's houses. They were always kind of clandestine, kind of hidden in someone's closet or something. They weren't put on display because, you know, at the end of the day, like, no one's proud about the fact that your son is in prison or your husband or whatever, right? And so when all these years later, when I encountered them here at NEMA, and I saw them in this completely different context, there was something very inside of me that wanted to create a distance to manufacture, right? Keep it at hand's length. Not because I was not proud or because that, you know, that's sort of a weird thing in, you know, my family history or whatever, but because it was in such a different context, right? It's an art object now. Right, it's not, right, it's not the way that you encountered it in all those households long ago with my cousin, where you could hold it and there was a tactility to it. And so this is one of the reasons why I kind of coined this phrase of Artepaño, to create a distinction. And I know, Vanji, you were like, but all the guys, they call it Paño Arte. And I was like, yeah, I know. I'm doing this on purpose to create this distinction, right? The distinction between, you know, the person who gets it in the mail, like you saw, right? And is able to hold it. I mean, I call these things, they're like a second skin, right? That replaces, you know, the tattooed skin of the pinto, right? And they're able to hold it, and there's a kind of, there's this tactility to it. And so I went to great efforts in order to have them framed and have them, again, in this different context, because I don't know, I felt like as the viewer in the museum, you don't kind of have the right to kind of hold it and feel it, because you're not that viewer. Although you are an important viewer, and it's important, as we're all saying, to talk about this tradition. And that's why I talk about the artistic tradition as Artepaño, as opposed to the guys who talk about it as Paño Arte, the ones who make it. So so it's, for me, it's this, distinction that I'm trying to make.
Thank you to all four. Now I want to pivot. I mean, we'll go back to organic. That's really interesting. But I'd like to talk a little bit about gender. Gender seems to be everywhere in and around the paños. I mean, in the motifs, like the depictions of the body, like the masculine body, the feminine body. Also, the context of the prison, right? Prisons, above all, sort people by gender and then enforce genders in various ways, and even do very strange things with gender. Ben, you're right that they enact various forms of ritualized emasculation, for instance. Most of the artists interviewed in the film and identified in the exhibit are men, but there's also women artists, like Reina Parra in the film, and Álvaro, even like as a curator, you speculate that maybe some of the pieces, one of the most striking ones at the beginning, right, with the Santa Fe, maybe by women. So how can we think of gender in the paños, of how they explore possibilities of gender, and about feminine agency in the paños, women artists in the paños, just general question.
Okay. Well, I'm sitting here as you're talking, thinking, well, the agency is that they just can't leave their minds. They just can't get the women out of their minds, whether it be their mother, whether it be their lover, whether it be the fantasy, whether it be La Virgen de Guadalupe. And yes, there's a lot of objectification of women. And I also, in making the film, thought a lot about that and how to try to balance that. And I tried a lot to find women artists. I really wanted to have a very balanced film, being a feminist and wanting to do that. It was very difficult. It was very difficult. Maybe I can't even remember if I found anybody else, but I think there might have been 2 other women, but they would not go on film. And Reno was the only one who was willing to be filmed and interviewed. So there's been, and even in 30 years later, I know Reno is now working on a project, and his only person in your film, female, is Rena, who is, 30 years later, she's gonna be in his documentary. So there's still like a dearth of being able to find women paño artists. So as far as the women taking control of the art, I haven't seen that as much as the women as subjects taking control of the art and being represented in the art, and being, whether they, certainly objectified, but also highly revered. And I think there's, such a strong position. You don't see like a lot of like little girls, like men, drawing their children or their daughters. You don't really see that. It's almost as if they're too precious to put in this environment. But you do see the mother representation and the religious. So I see that the female agency as clearly demonstrated by their art and their drawing of the women and different kinds. You will even see in the image, in the way, in the faces of the women. Some of the women are just super gentle. Faces just beautiful, just soft, and some of them that are very almost violent looking. So they're sort of the spectrum of types of women and not only just the general of, mother whore, religious mother whore, kind of depictions. But as you were saying, I was just thinking the agency is that they're just always present.
Yeah, I have, I think, two comments to make. First, just to continue what Evangelina was saying, the context is very hetero-patriarchal, and that's obvious. But so is the academic context. We're always looking for these bad man heroes, these gangster warrior heroes, or these redemption narratives. And they usually have the farthest to go to get redemption, because there's some things, there's some reasons why some are find themselves in these positions, and so sometimes we look for that, and we efface the more complex stories that we get with women in prison. So the academics are really not looking in all the right places, though there are some. And the findings that we're finding some very profound differences and different modes of communication. So the prisoners are going to adorn themselves, male, female. That's common. The tattoo culture now has just exploded, and everybody's got really fine tattoos, not like the ones I have, as I was telling them, that were made with a popsicle stick and needle and thread. It's very unhygienic, right? And aesthetically very raw. But when it comes to women paño artists, she's performed a miracle in finding one. And what we have here is a very common discourse that we have in the little scholarship that exists about women in prison, and that concerns their gendered experience in prison and out. So there's a saying that whenever a male gets arrested, the first thing they want is their lawyer. Where's my lawyer? I want to talk to my lawyer. But when a woman is arrested, it's, how's my child? Where's my child? That's the first concern. It's a cliche almost, but it actually plays out. You saw here, the concern here was, I shouldn't have put my child through this experience. Juanita Diaz-Coto is a Puerto Rican scholar who has done a lot of interviews with women in prison. So she's got a rich oral history of women in prison, and it inevitably is going to reveal a lot about the men, because they're usually behind their incarceration or their reasons for their incarceration. So this starts to get real complicated for the scholars who want to find a warrior hero, the next Malcolm X, right? That's the romantic story. That's a story everybody, we want to make a film about, Huey Newton and, the Black Panthers, Fred Hampton and such. These stories are more real. They're more banal, more painful. There's a lot of suffering, and they're the ones who are suffering. It's a difficult world. So I think the academics are to blame for a lot of the lack of material and for not looking. No one has been as rigorous as she has. Well, Juanita Diaz-Coto has been. But, so I want to just point that out, that there's what we do know, is very unique differences in the experience that feminists have taught us already. And what we don't recognize is our own fault in looking in all the wrong places, or in only some places and not others.
I don't know what to say after that, but in France, I don't know about the United States, but in France there is more and more women in prisons. That means, or the balance is equilibrating, but maybe we can wait more and more woman Chicana artist. If it's the same curve.
I would say that the women are the caretakers of the paños. They are the ones who, again, squirrel them away, put them in the linen, with the linens, keep them despite all the pain and the problematic context that comes along with them. But as far as women artists, yes, I'm just going to kind of repeat a little bit about what my colleagues already said. There's very few, other than the couple that they've already mentioned. I was on a very broad platform, Hyperallergic, last spring, and again, there was like someone who came forward and emailed me, contacted me, and said, because that was a question, right? Where are the women? Where are the women artists? And and I said, I don't know. I don't know of any. And other than the ones that y'all were talking about, somebody said, I know this one woman, and she makes these, and said, contact me, and I'll hook you up, and I'll put you in contact with her. No names were given, but I will have to follow up on that. But I think just to sort of follow up on what Ben was saying, I think part of it is on the scholars, and part of it perhaps is on me, as an art historian, as a critic, that maybe there is a kind of sensibility that I should be looking at, because so many of these are anonymous. So many of them are anonymous. We don't know if it was a man or a woman that made it. We just sort of assume that it was a man. So maybe I should be sort of developing some kind of way to sort of draw out, is there a kind of feminine sensibility to the way they make paños, and so that maybe we can start identifying that these are not all men, right? A bunch of them are anonymous, and we just assume they're men. But maybe there are more women paño artists than we are acknowledging. So yeah, so again, it's on me.
Well, it's on all of us, but we do know that they exist in different forms. There's all the musicologists who are into hip-hop, and it's a huge multi-genre area. The people that come to mind that are engaging in the same discourses as we see in the paño art, lowriders or people like J-Rocks, the gangster onda, Miss Lady Pinks. This is a scary hip-hop artist, man. I never want to meet her, right? And there's just Vel the Wonder is just like serious gangster, and then some bossa nova. She's just a really amazing musician. So there are other forms, and they're engaging in similar discourses. It's proto-feminist and sometimes really outright feminists. And one other thing, there's other mediums. There's hip-hop is verse, so there's going to be poetry. I'm working with a student who's uncovering Chicano Prisoner poetry from California, one from New Mexico. And also, we kept some of our paños from our family members with the tejidos that my grandmother would make, and that all the women in the family were taught to make up until my generation. It was the last one, really. So there's other forms. I don't know if tejidos are a thing. If tejidos are knittings, there's specific type of real thin knitting, not the yarn type. And it has certain stitches, I guess, that are apparently unique to Mexican praxis that probably come from Spain. And stitching gets really complicated and real complex culturally and politically and historically. And I don't have that expertise, but it's a thing, and that might be an area for textile studies folks. Feminist studies have done this a lot, have used textile studies as historiography in different disciplines. I know in Persian studies, for instance, that's a thing. It's a pretty big area. So they're there. We're looking at just some small areas.
Now I want to turn to sort of comparing paños as art to other forms of art that may be relevant, and maybe those comparisons are useful, or maybe they're not. So I want us to think, for instance, they bring to mind placas, which are kind of distinguishing signs, such as tattoos. In your writing, for instance, Ben, you talk about Chicano barrio murals. Reno, you talk about Catholic ex-votos in Italy. Hand-painted kerchiefs from other traditions, such as those by Irish publicans in British prisons in the 70s, and even American folk art. How are these comparisons useful? How are they limiting? If, for instance, paños are not folk art, but popular art instead, as Ben has proposed, what is the difference, and why does it matter? So comparing paños to other forms of art.
Should I go?
I'd like to
Go
hear
for
from
it.
an artist, yeah.
Yeah, I'd like to hear.
From a
Yeah,
visual artist.
I'm-
You're also an artist, yeah.
I'm making parallels between the ex-votos, but not only in Italy, but also in Spain or in Mexico, because it's a visual tradition in the first person. That's mean the painter is telling his own story, or is asking someone to tell his own story. So, and in its way, there is a lot of pieces in the exhibition you will see after, because I don't know if we can see so much in the Padias collection, but in the exhibition there is a lot that the inmate is telling his own story, like a way of I don't know, but the guys are saying it also in the movie, but it's a way to express it and then to forget it, to throw it away, to throw this story and to forget it, to not be embarrassed with it no more. And the ex voto in a way is exactly the same point, like to thank someone and then we are clear. I mean, we don't need to, we don't owe no one. And that's also a parallel with the incarceration. It's a way to pay the price. And the ex voto is exactly is the same, and I think the paño in a way is the same also.
Like a mea culpa.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. If I could add some things, you know, I see the distinction, and it's almost a forced distinction, you know, that academics do, right? But, you know, there's folk art and popular art. I like that distinction because when you think of folk art, we know of this already through the folk tales. And if you listen to the folk tales, and this is not some great insight of mine, it's known already, folk tales are very conservative and very misogynist. You know, Little Red Riding Hood, I mean, these are all basically designed to police women's sexuality for the most part, or to teach subservience to a monarchy. Like all the folk stories that we hear, almost all of them are about oppression. They're all designed to teach us how to be docile and to follow the rules of society. Sometimes they're good. If you lived in the desert in the Bronze Age, you don't want to eat pork because you're going to get, you know, brainworms, right? But a lot of times they're social and they're political and they're not necessarily positive, right? A lot of folk culture is about preserving something, and some people from some backgrounds, like I'm one of them. You know, the happy days from the 1950s wasn't good for my people. That wasn't a happy day. We're in the back of the bus. That's not a happy day. I don't want to preserve any of that culture at all. Not even a little bit. Popular culture, though, that's more organic. That's always evolving and changing with eras. And you get revolutionary ruptures. You get people saying, you know, that's okay, but what if I did this? You know, because that order doesn't make any sense to me. This is how we do things now. This is what matters to me. So you get a whole bunch of, like, you know, you get graffiti art. A lot of, you know, in the 80s, it's just a lot of underclass folks who don't have a lot of property, but there's a wall, and it may not be their wall, but they're going to paint on it, and that's also their protest. They're reclaiming something. And there's a lot of other philosophical implications and political implications of graffiti art. The point is, it's a politic, it's a philosophy, it's an aesthetic that speaks to the youth in that moment. Hip-hop was a popular art. It wasn't a folk art. Corridos are kind of folk art, you know, or some corridos. And those can be political too. But the distinction that I just want to just underscore is that sometimes folk culture is really conservative and static, and the popular is something that's always rejuvenating itself. Every generation, really, and sometimes many times in the same generation. And for this, I see as even the religious dimensions, which might tie into the devotion, nichos, and all that stuff, they're in a different context. They're presented with, you know, the good, the bad. There's devil figures in prisons. There's Jesus Christ figures reclaimed by prisoners who sometimes have been engaging in some really pathological stuff, or maybe never had a shot in their life to begin with. So that's more, I would say this is more popular art than folk art, because it is engaging historical, political milieu or a context that is involving some levels and multiple levels of injustice and multiple levels of a unique subculture that has tried to survive in unfair circumstances.
I'm going to disagree with you. Not totally, but I'm not an academic in this world. And again, this comes from a perspective of the film having been made 30 years ago, and what Paño art looks like today. And certainly the paños. So the paños that you saw in the film, if the film is 30 years old, those paños are 30 years old and plus. So this was of an era, and those paños were made in a completely different era of, like, many of, for example, the ones that you collect now, which I would say there is an evolution of the art, because the art, I wouldn't say that it's folk art or popular art. I would say the folk art became popular art and has become recognized, whereas I'm a purist in that way, and I would feel that this is folk art, and I would feel that, because when I think about the film, and I think about the paños in this film, and I think about the paños the way that Rudy and I talked about it and learned about it and connected it all to the history of New Mexico, because this is where most of these paños were from. Most of these guys were in New Mexico. And I connect it to, the tradition in New Mexico of the wood carvings, or, the lowrider cars. And all of those are expressions of this culture. And also when I think about folk art, I think of art that is created with the most basic raw materials, what you have. Just like, the most famous carvers come from Española, New Mexico, and started out with just a piece of wood and carving. And so, like, these paños, I doubt that the men and women who are making paños today, or who have made paños in the last 10 years, are using coffee grinds or are using egg yolks and to mix up paint. I doubt that they're using very little of what was used in the original, what I would say, folk art. If you want to, like, make a category that 30 years it was folk art and today it's not, but to me, that's what is folk art. That's what makes it the folk art, is that it is made with the raw materials of, this is what you have at your disposal. And you can see also in these kinds of paños, what I was noticing for the first time, because I looked at the exhibition, there's a lot of paños from Reno's collection, and that there's a lot more space. And it's as if these guys, it was so precious. Like, a paño was so precious to get that they had to fill it all in. There's like hardly no white space in there. Everything is filled in because it was so precious. It was so hard to get. And so, they just were just pouring and pouring. And these pieces are also extremely meditative and extremely self-reflective. And it's almost like they're writing their memoirs in these paños. And if you see more popular art paños, you will see a lot more space. You'll see a lot more. For example, I never saw in the paños, and it's interesting, it's fascinating to see how this art evolves, right? Because that's what art is. It evolves. It can't ever stay static or stay in one way. And for example, there was, like, we were talking about fandom, right? And you'll see these paños now with, like, the 49ers or, the Rams or whatever. And I never saw that back then in any of the paños. And it made me wonder, was that just too, that was too fluffy? Their world were not about, sports. Their worlds were about their lives, and they're missing their family and what they didn't have. And it was just so much more intense. And again, you have to think about how the prison system has changed from 30 years ago or 40 years or 50 years ago to today. And the access to materials and the ease. The tradition started with bed sheets and pillowcases because there were no paños. They decided to put paños, to sell paños because they were ripping up all the bed sheets in prison, and today that doesn't happen. That wouldn't even be like, an issue. It's like, yeah, go to the commissary, you get a paño, or whatever else they could have access to, and the pens and the colors and the, any kind of, materials that they have accessible to them that's available in prison, because for safety reasons, is much more sophisticated than they would have had 30 years ago, 40 years ago, 50 years ago. So I think that those are the difference of the paño styles. And, for example, when we made the film, and Rudy had, he has, paño 500 or some collection pieces in his collection, and we couldn't ever get anybody to even think about doing an exhibition of these paños and showing a film like we're doing today. I mean, I feel like, the film has waited 30 years to get recognized by a popular audience because, museums, and that's why I'm so grateful to the Nora Eccles and to the museums that are inviting the film and inviting the paños now, and to the work that Reno has done, because you couldn't have imagined. And also, I got to just do a quick shout out, and Álvaro, and what I say is that, 30 years ago, Chicanos didn't have Álvaros, working in the museums, being a curator. We didn't have that. So there was no recognition, there was no understanding, there was no appreciation. It might have been like, ooh, look at this, this is interesting, look at these, whatever. But today we have the Álvaros, we have the Bens, we have the Felipes, who are now in positions of power and in positions of, they have agency. And that's what I always say, finally. And that's why my little film is getting a lot more recognition in these last 4 or 5 years than it got when it was first, made. It was hell. I couldn't even get money for it. And I got $5,000 grant to make this film. And, it was a hell of a lot more money if you just, added in all the free stuff that was given to the film. But, so it's exciting. It's very exciting. And I just wish Rudy Padilla would still be alive to see this, because this was his dream. This is what we had dreamed of, to be kind of accepted, right? So, thank you.
Well, I was just going to talk very quickly just about false equivalencies. You were talking about tattoos and paños, and yes, there is a shared visual vocabulary when you're talking about the paño art, when you're talking about car art, when you're talking about graffiti, when you're talking about the placazo, on somebody's arm. There's a similar visual vocabulary, but all of those things are doing different cultural work. They're doing different things. So the problem is, right, when someone is showing their gang affiliation with a tattoo on their hand or whatever, that's doing a very different cultural work than when somebody is writing down their gang affiliation on a paño, right, when they're trying to tell their life story. And something that, I asked in an interview with Reno, forthcoming interview, and I said, oh, is this stuff gang affiliated? And he said, yeah, of course, they're all in gangs. All these guys are in gangs. But it's doing a very different thing when it's on a paño versus, right, when it's on your arm versus when it's on your car versus when it's on the wall. And so, yeah, there's these sort of false equivalencies that we have to kind of watch out for. Because one of the things, to go back to what Vanji was saying about the fandom, 49ers or Raiders or all that sort of stuff, one of the things that a lot of these artists are being denied their right to self-expression because they believe that those paños are somehow doing gang stuff or they're like secret communiques, between between themselves and other prisoners or whatever, but regarding like the fandom stuff, that it's somehow communicating something like having to do with gambling, and that of course was like almost one of the most stupidest thing I could ever come up with. You think like the bookie is waiting for like the artist to finish a paño, so you could, like, what's your bet on the Raiders? Come on, hey man, like hold on man, like give me another month, you know, and I'll tell you. Yeah, I mean, it's absolute ridiculousness. So yeah, but sometimes there's a danger, right, when there's this sort of equivalency, like oh, that means, you know, kill that dude over there, right? But over here in the paño, that's not what it's about. Maybe it's a tale about something he regretted doing or something like that. So that's just what I wanted to say.
Yeah, sorry, and also the paño, the tradition has maybe evolved, because when they're doing a 49ers helmet or a Mickey Mouse or a Winnie the Pooh, that's to please someone, you know. And with the dark pieces, you know, you were not pleasing a kid. If you were sending it to your son, for sure the son don't care. What he wants is a Winnie the Pooh.
Yeah, absolutely. That's, yeah, like the birthday cards. Obviously, you're going to have, you know.
I think we'll open it up to the audience for a couple of last questions. There are these microphones set up at the end. Does anybody have a question?